that we'll ask somebody to fulfill. And so we, last week, opened up the application process. So we took applications. We had quite a few folks apply. They're being vetted right now to make sure that they're eligible. So the two big eligibility criteria, one is that you've lived in the 3rd ward for at least 6 months. So you can't live in another ward or another city and apply to serve. And then the second one is that you have to be in good standing with the city, meaning you can't owe property tax, income tax, you can't owe any money to the city. So that's actually within our charter as well. Anyone we appoint has to be in good standing. So the candidates who applied are being vetted right now. The end of the day today, the final candidates who are eligible will be made public. Tomorrow at our appointments committee, the appointments committee will review all of the applications. They'll decide who they want to interview for first round interviews. We'll schedule first round interviews on February 20th. I anticipate the appointments committee, which is made up of 3 city commissioners, Commissioner Perdue, Commissioner Robbins, and Commissioner Isasi. They will make a recommendation for the top 2 to 3 candidates to move on to a final interview. The final interview will take place with the full city commission on March 5th. And then we will deliberate and either make a decision that day or make a decision at our next meeting in March. My hope is to have somebody sworn in no later than March 19th so that they can start in April.
Wonderful. And speaking of elections, there's going to be a few changes to the mayoral election this year. One of them being that you won't be on the ballot since you've just served you're in your 2nd term currently. But the other thing that's really different about this one is that it's in a presidential year, which has not been the case for local mayoral election here. What difference does that make for the election? And I know that a mayoral primary is also a little bit different than what people are used to with primary elections. So can you tell us these differences?
I will, and it is interesting because, as you likely know, there have been individuals who have announced that they're running for mayor, and so my email and phone has rung, and I've gotten contacted by a lot of folks who are like, somebody's running against you. And I have to remind them that several years ago, before I was mayor, the residents of Grand Rapids voted to implement term limits. So I am term limited out. I can't run again even if I wanted to, and so it's going to be an open race. And then secondly, what also changed is we moved to an even year election. And you're right, it's going to be a whole lot busier election season. Historically, because the mayor and commissioners are nonpartisan, it was very intentional to have the elections in odd years. Many other cities still do nonpartisan elections in odd years. And so it will be, the impact, in my opinion, we'll see as this year plays out. One, it's going to be harder to kind of cut through the noise of all of the other candidates running. I think whether we like it or not, it's going to be more partisan because there's going to be so many other partisan races on the ballot as well. It's going to be a lot more expensive to run as mayor, quite frankly. You're going to have to raise more money and knock on more doors and do more mailings just to get your message out. And so those are some differences. The other difference is historically when we had odd years, if there were more than 2 candidates, there was a primary, but if the one of those individuals got over 50% in the primary, they won outright. That's no longer the case. Our charter was changed around that as well. So it's a forced primary and general, regardless of, let's say somebody comes through the primary with 85% of the vote, they still have to also run a general election. So that also makes it more expensive. So we'll see. I mean, there's going to be other races as well. We have 3 city commission races. So there's a race in every ward. 2 of those seats are open. So Commissioner O'Connor is also termed out. So that will be an open seat. Obviously, 3rd ward is an open seat. And then we have Commissioner Isasi running in the 2nd ward again.
So lots to watch in local elections. Don't let it slip away as we start paying attention to the presidential elections. But we are now at time for our first break. When we come back, Mayor Bliss and the city engineer, Tim Burkman, will be talking and getting to know each other here on City Connection. So stay tuned.
For over 30 years after humble beginnings as a public access TV station, the Community Media Center has grown to be an active, multi-platform media and technology assistance organization, encouraging and enabling our community to push their creative boundaries. We power a variety of resources, including a music-centered community radio station, WYCE, a community venue with stage and screen at Wealthy Theater, citizen-driven journalism with the Rapidian, a web development team empowering local nonprofits, an education department that trains and broadens students' minds, and a free speech public access television studio, GRTV, where it all began. By introducing audiences to new voices and ideas, we enhance community engagement and create connections between artists and audiences, enriching our city's cultural offerings. We empower and collaborate with platforms and resources accessible to all and used by all. Every free democratic society depends on media, accessible to the community and uncensored by government. The Community Media Center continues this work for the media landscape of today and tomorrow. These platforms and services empower our neighbors to tell their stories and explore the richness of culture that Grand Rapids has to offer. Connect, discover, learn, create, and share. The Grand Rapids Community Media Center.
Today, our city engineer, Mr. Tim Burkman. A lot of folks may not know that we have a city engineer or what they do. And so today we're going to try to shed a little light on that and also just talk about all the great projects that you're working on or that you're engaged with. So first off, this is Tim Burkman, our city engineer. Tim reminded me he's been with the city 4-ish years.
Just over 4.
Just over 4 years. Before that, though, you also worked in government.
Yes, I did.
Before coming to us, so you have a lot of experience. So let's do 2 things. One, talk about your path and how you decided you wanted to be a city engineer. Yeah. And then let's talk about what does a city engineer do and kind of what's the scope of your work.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about you, how you landed in Grand Rapids as our city engineer.
Yeah, well, very thankful to be here in Grand Rapids, and thanks for having me on. So chances are, if any of our viewers are watching, if their kids are interested in science or math, they will be encouraged to check out engineering, because that's where those two come together. So just always had an affinity for that. Went to school for civil engineering in Valparaiso, Indiana, and started my career as a consultant, working with a lot of local agencies on their transportation projects, pathway projects, utility improvement projects. But my favorite community to work for at that time in Northwest Indiana was the city of Valparaiso. And so one day they offered me a position to come work for them full time, and I had thought, well, someday I'd love to grow up to be the city engineer of Valparaiso. And fortunately, I was able to achieve that relatively early in my career and before I probably fully grew up. And so worked there for about 13 years, fantastic community, was part of a wonderful leadership team. But around 2017, 2018, my family and I just felt this pull to West Michigan. We just wanted to be in this area. And so though life was great in Valparaiso, we started checking out the area to see what opportunities might exist. And actually at that time, I reached out to the city engineer of Grand Rapids at the time, because obviously this is a wonderful community, and I was kind of monitoring from afar what good things were happening here, and so reached out to see if there were any opportunities.
My goodness, 2017, was that Mark?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually had a number of conversations with him. He was trying to find a pathway for me, but things just didn't work out at that time. And so 2018 opened up the door for me to move to West Michigan, and I became the executive director of a planning organization in Holland, and I worked with the Council of Governments, Holland, Zeeland, the surrounding townships, the counties of Ottawa and Allegan and their road commissions. And so really got to meet a lot of great leaders in West Michigan, and also had some exposure through that to Grand Rapids, so that about a year later, Grand Rapids started looking for a city engineer. And though again, I was happy where I was at, I missed being a city engineer, decided I would see if the opportunity would present itself, and introduced myself to the city leaders, and was very, very pleased that they picked me. And so that was 2019 that I started, and so going on a little bit over 4 years here.
Nice. Well, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
So for folks who have absolutely no idea what a city engineer does, you do a lot.
Yes.
I think sometimes people don't have a grasp of all of the different projects that you have a role in, both within the city government, but also with a lot of our partners. So for all of those budding city engineers out
Right.
there, how would you describe the scope of your work?
Yeah, so one of the things I love about working for the city in this capacity, the city's mission and our strategic plan, as you know, is to elevate quality of life through excellent city services. And obviously that can happen in the very big sorts of projects, the big, the amphitheater that's coming downtown, or the river restoration project. But it also happens when we repair a sidewalk that's in front of somebody's home, or fix a pothole that's on their way to work. And so we span the spectrum of a number of city projects. And so the city policy is that anything over $10,000 that's a construction project gets bid through the engineering department. And so that's pretty much anything nowadays with construction. It's hard to
Not
move.
many $5,000 projects.
Not much can happen under that threshold. And so really we serve as stewards of the city's capital plan. We take projects from conception through design, through construction, and then through record drawings, so that we have good as-built to reflect what improvements we've made. And so we work across multiple departments, those asset owners, whether it be the water department, sewer department, our facilities team, mobile GR, if they're looking to make an improvement to an intersection or a pedestrian crossing. We help plan for those projects, make sure they're designed in accordance with city specs and standards, which we monitor and update as new design standards come our way, or as we seek to be in compliance with any state or federal regulations or guidelines with respect to those design standards. We seek the necessary permits, whether those be state or federal agencies that we need to seek permits from. Then we bid those out, and throughout construction are inspecting it to make sure it's built per plan. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we just maintain record drawings, so that years down the road, when another project needs to happen, we know exactly where that water main went, or where that valve was placed, or what was installed below the surface. And so that's the primary aspect, but we also work with permitting. We permit for things in the right-of-way, whether that's private utility companies, or temporary occupancy permits within the right-of-way if somebody needs to park scaffolding somewhere, or a dumpster somewhere, or encroachment permits when something extends into the right-of-way. And so we monitor those activities. We issue about 1,000 permits a year, and process those, and then just really seek to coordinate across departments, so that we're timing all of our projects right. I know that may be hard to believe when folks are navigating around detours and construction zones in the summer months. We do have a finite window where we have to seek to get everything done in, but we really try to coordinate so that we make sure we're touching an area at one time, and not doing an improvement only to find out years later Consumers Energy needs to tear that up, or DTE needs to tear that up. So lots of work across departments, across agencies, to really elevate quality of life.
Yeah. Well, and if you watch our city commission meetings, you know that almost every single commission meeting we have projects that we're approving, but we also have funding that we're approving for projects. And I don't think some people realize how many city facilities that we have, and how much goes into maintaining them and upgrading them, right? From Lake Michigan Filtration Plant, where we
Yes.
bring in water from the lake and, people turn on their tap and it's there,
Right.
to the wastewater treatment facility, which we just finished up our $88 million anaerobic digester, and we're creating renewable natural gas. Your team was involved in that.
Right.
Some of the big projects that many of you will see happen this summer. We have the MLK Lodge that we'll be working on. We have 2 fire stations we're working to build. We're working to move off 201 Market and build a new public works facility over at Scribner.
Right.
So all of that on top of, 566 miles of streets and
It's a little over 600, yes.
600 miles of
and 900
streets.
miles of sidewalks. That's another area that we oversee, the sidewalk program, the sidewalk snow plowing program, sidewalk permitting and licensing. But yes, you hit on a large number of the areas that we touch, yes.
Yeah. And then the piece, I know you and I have spent a lot of time on this over the years. For those of you wondering, yes, we're still working on restoring the Grand River and removing the dams. There's 2 projects, so we broke off the lower reach, which is the 4 lower head dams, and then the upper reach, which is the larger 6th Street Dam. Your department has been taking the lead on that. We are working with state and federal departments to go through permitting. And sometimes what people don't realize is even on the trail work, so in addition to what we're trying to do in the river, all the trail work along the river's edge, many of those projects, we also have to get permits from the state and the federal government. So talk a little bit about the scope of that work and how you're able to help lead through some of those processes. And really, some people have asked me, like, why do we have to go through all of these different permit processes? And you're an engineer, you understand the different layers of government. So how would you, if somebody said to you, why are you having to work with Eagle or EPA or FEMA on these projects, what would you say?
Yeah, so you're right. We are making good progress on the river project and working closely with our partners at Grand Rapids Whitewater. And speaking of permitting, we're almost a year from last year, it was March, that we did withdraw our permit application. We are working with a number of state and federal agencies on this. And so, of course, their interests are to look out for the good of the public. These are waters of the state, waters of the U.S., so Eagle, EPA, very interested in what we do from an environmental standpoint as well. And so they're monitoring things like, fish passage. Are what we're doing going to make it suitable for that to occur? Monitoring things like what sort of impact are we going to have to the river bottom? Now, we know that our river through Grand Rapids is heavily impaired and has gone through a lot in terms of its original natural state. But what we're trying to do by removing those dams, restore it to close to its original condition, at least from that standpoint, open up ways and avenues for diversified recreation opportunities to really draw people into there. And so we do have those higher levels of authority that we work with as a city. We answer to the state and to the federal agencies, and we're coordinating very closely with them. They're very engaged with us. But you're right, it's not just the in-river work, it's the adjacent river work, the public museum, Lions Square, Leonard to Ann Trail, Canal Park. There's a walkway between the JW and Blue Bridge, I think.
Blue Bridge.
In that area. All of those, we're touching the water's edge. We're touching areas that may be defined as wetlands. And they want to make sure that we're not filling in any of those areas that need to be left open for environmental benefits, but also for flood passage and things like that. So it's a tedious process, but we are working very closely with them, and we are making good progress.
Yeah, and we just have a minute left. As we wrap up this segment, one other thing that I've talked to a lot of folks about too is even our work with FEMA. Obviously, flooding is a significant priority for us to prevent flooding. We've done a lot of investment in our flood walls, but as we look at making any changes to the river, we have to be mindful of not having any impact on flood. And over this past week, we've all seen our river rise and some of those walkways be underwater. And so again, all of the detail that goes into planning, you are around a lot of those tables, but your team is really leading on. And that is to make sure that the decisions we make today have a positive impact on our community and that there aren't unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
thank you for that work.
Yeah.
We are about out of time on this segment, so I'll close and we'll come back together with Allison to answer questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right, thank you.
Welcome back to City Connection. If you're just now tuning in, I'm Allison Donahue, and in this segment, Mayor Bliss and Tim Burkman, the Grand Rapids City Engineer, will be taking questions and submissions from viewers like you. To take part in this live conversation, you can send your questions to cityconnection@grcmc.org or submit them through the Rapidian's Instagram story @TheRapidian. All right. It looks like we have a few questions from the community. This one is from Tom. Tom wants to know, how much is the city involved with highway ramps, or when highway ramps are closed or open for construction? Sometimes it seems like there is no communication and highway detours are running right into city construction. Is this a question for you?
That's definitely a question for you.
Yes, so we do work very closely with our partners at MDOT, coordinating continuously, but we have key meetings throughout the year where we intentionally look at our project workload and our forecast. And so that will impact timing of projects so that we're not running a detour into a detour. And so, for instance, we've got a big project that's kicking off on Division that will take place from Fulton to Michigan, really over the next 2 construction seasons. When we told MDOT about that, they altered a plan that they have to account for the fact that traffic will be moving differently in and around that area. But we do work closely with them. We do try to share out their information as well on our media sites to just make the public aware. But it is something that we work closely with them on.
Yeah, and I'll add though, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've had lots of people reach out to me who are unhappy with the new design that goes down to 1 lane at 196 by the Beltline, and then the multiple lanes on 96 where that merges together, because there is a backlog often, how they divided up those lanes to go on the Beltline. And I made it very clear that we don't design those changes, and we don't necessarily have a ton of say in the design aspect. I think we can weigh in a little bit, but ultimately, they have their own engineers and their own designers for some of those street reconstruction, just like the double diamond at Cascade. That was a decision by MDOT. And so I think sometimes people think that we are making those decisions at the local level, and that's not the case.
Yeah, and MDOT's working with Federal Highway Administration too, and designing to federal standards. So they do certainly take our input, and they let us know when something's going on. But you're right, those are ultimately designed by their engineers and constructed by MDOT's construction teams and contractors.
All right, so you're not the people to be mad at for those detours.
Not for that one.
Not for that one.
Many others, yes.
Okay.
Well, sometimes I can point to a county road. I'll be like, no, that's not a city road, that's a county road. It can be very confusing.
Yeah.
What's a state road, county road, city road?
Right, and they're all manned by different people, I'm guessing, or?
They have, yes,
And,
they have different oversight.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. We have another question here from the community from Janelle Ray. Janelle asks, Grand Rapids does not have the tax revenue to cover the replaceable value of our road, water, and sewer assets, the most basic of municipal budget line items. We're looking at a huge cost per household to replace systems that were developed in the 50s and 70s, or 50s through 70s. If that cost was $16,000 per household per year, that would bankrupt a family at 30% of the AMI. Our sprawl is expensive. This is exactly the type of predicament the nonprofit Strong Towns talks about. We have insufficient density for the needed tax revenue per household per year. How is this being addressed through our land use policies? It's a long question.
Yeah.
I can take a start at it. So first of all, water and sewer projects, improvements, are funded through the rate base. And so there's an annual rate study that's done that looks very closely at what are the anticipated needs. So we have asset management plans for just about anything you could possibly imagine for the city, but especially our utilities. And so we know exactly, the age, condition of every line that's in the city, and know when to anticipate its replacement. So the rate study looks at and evaluates what do those rates need to be set at to adequately fund those improvements. From a street perspective, back in 2014, we were very fortunate that the voters passed and approved the Vital Streets program, which was an extension of the income tax. And that brings in a really helpful additional source of funding, about $15 to $18 million, that allows us to invest on average $30 to $35 million a year in our streets, which is the envy of many other communities to be able to have that source. And so we're continually driving our road improvements to try to get to a 70% of our streets being in what's called a good or fair condition and state. And we're making notable progress, but I'd have to look into what the $16,000 number referenced was to better understand where that's coming from. But just trying to give a little bit of a delineation to those revenue sources and where we get the funds to improve our assets.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, the Vital Streets dollars, that's a dedicated tax, and it can't be used for anything other than streets and sidewalks and right away. And as our city engineer said, we are one of the few communities that have dedicated funding, especially funding at that level, which has been able to enabled us to make significant improvements on our local streets. And then the other question and how infrastructure relates to land use. Most of our city is built out. We don't have a ton of vacant land. And if you look at our city is about a 44 square mile city. The infrastructure on those streets already exists. There are pieces where we still need to connect sidewalk and we need to do upgrades and improvement into water and sewer, but actually a lot of that happened years ago when we separated our water and our sewer. So we did a big CSO project, cost over $300 million. A lot of that infrastructure was already done over the last 35 years, but most of our city has the infrastructure already in place for water, for sewer, for streets, for sidewalks, our street lights, and now because we're an older urban community, a lot of our focus is now on maintenance, upgrades, fixing what is broken, and not really expanding out. So we don't really expand out. And then, are there communities around us, that are growing? Absolutely, but we don't have any control over what those communities do, and we don't have any say over how they choose to make decisions about their land use. Our goal is to increase density where it makes sense, where we have the infrastructure to support that density, particularly in downtown and around the city center ring and on major corridors. But for the most part, I would say much of our large infrastructure is built out, and we're now in the process of upgrades.
And I'll just add to that quickly because you made me think of something. As density increases, which we only have the land that we have to work with, so as we increase density, one of the core components of Vital Streets, the Vital Streets program, is making complete streets. And so that looks at multiple modes of transportation, so micro-mobility, bicycles, pedestrians, bus stops. How do we better weave that accommodations for those users into the street right-of-ways that we already have, so that we can support all those modes of transportation.
Yeah.
So the city is focused more on improving and enhancing what we have rather than building out more.
Well, I think on some of those infrastructure elements, whether it's water or sewer or some of the street, we're not building many new streets.
Right.
Not many. I can't think of any brand new streets we've built. Because our city is already built out and the grid system already exists largely. Mm-hmm. There may be some additions, but minor usually. So when you look at those big infrastructure projects, yes. However, we are investing, as the engineer said, in making improvements. So when we are redoing a street, we're looking at complete streets and, how do we make it safe for cyclists and pedestrians and create safe crosswalks. And then on the flip side, I would say complementary side, we're also investing in things like the Dash. How can we take some city funds and make sure that we're also creating circular systems for people to get around on public transit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is an anonymous question. The question says, I live at the end of a cul-de-sac on the north side that gets a lot of dog walkers and runners, but we don't have a sidewalk. Fits into our conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think we would really benefit from one. How does the city decide what neighborhoods get sidewalks and which ones don't?
That's a great question.
Yes, so part of the Vital Streets program does dedicate about $2 million a year towards sidewalks. And I mentioned that earlier. A big task that we have is trying to get through the city's entire sidewalk network throughout the 15-year program. Focused on maintenance of what we already have. So there's about 900 miles of sidewalks throughout the city. We're about halfway through of physically inspecting and looking for deficiencies in the sidewalk that might be a hazard to someone or might be impassable to someone who's in a wheelchair, going through and fixing those. We have a very limited amount of funding that we utilize for filling in sidewalk gaps, which is a need we hear about often, similar to this request where there's a street segment that doesn't have sidewalks. We have a criteria system that was put into place by the Vital Streets Oversight Commission that looks at when we do have funding for sidewalks, which we try to leverage heavily with grant resources to stretch those dollars as far as we can. It looks at things like proximity to schools, proximity to bus stops. There's like 10 criteria basically. And so it gives a score to those gap segments. But that's something that we're very cognizant of. We do need a funding strategy for filling in those sidewalk gaps, but we're able to do about $1 million a year with what we have.
And it looks like we are out of community questions for the time being, but we're about to head into another break, so maybe there'll be some more that join us after this break. When we return, we'll be taking more questions from the community. If there's still time to take, and there is still time to take part in the conversation, so just send your questions to cityconnection@grcmc.org, or you can submit them through the Rapidian's Instagram story @the Rapidian. Stay tuned.
It's morning in Grand Rapids. Do you know what's going on in your city? Stay informed about what's happening in your community with The Rapidian, your source for hyperlocal news and information. The Rapidian is a community-focused news source powered by local residents like you. Our volunteer writers and reporters create content that hits close to home about topics like local government, business, schools, events, and people. The Rapidian goes beyond the headlines to provide in-depth coverage of issues that affect Grand Rapids directly, so you can stay in the know. We aim to uplift the community by sharing positive, inspiring stories of growth, progress, and neighborhood pride. The Rapidian is your neighborhood newspaper for the digital age. Follow us on our website and social media to stay connected to your community. This is The Rapidian.
And we're back. Here with us on City Connection is Mayor Bliss, and we have more questions from viewers like you. So let's get into those. This first question comes from Kane. Kane asks, I regularly have to clean up dog poop left in my front yard by people walking by. I posted a sign and I ask people when I see them, but it's frustrating to have spots left in my lawn when I try to take care of it. What would you suggest I do? Not a fun problem.
I know that's a hard one because, we have rules at the city around taking care of your dogs, making sure they're on a leash. If you're in a park or a public space, the rule is that you pick up after yourself. And it can be enforced, but unfortunately we just don't always have the number of people we need to enforce what some may consider a minor infraction. So that's a hard one, especially when it's on private property and not public property. I think you're doing everything right? Post it, ask people to be kind and respect your space. As a dog owner, a very responsible dog owner, it frustrates me when I see other dog owners who aren't responsible because I think it gives all of us a bad name. And I personally think dogs are amazing, and I think they fill our life with joy, and I think they help with loneliness and mental health and all of these wonderful things. So I wish I had a good answer, but I really don't. I think, again, calling on the good in people to be a good neighbor and a good dog owner is probably the best way to do it. And hopefully people will respect that.
Hopefully. I've also noticed that in this season where snow is starting to melt, dog poop kind of shows up a little bit more because it's been frozen under a couple feet of snow for a few months. So maybe being patient through the spring, and then might get picked up over time. But yeah.
Yeah, I know.
It's a tough problem.
It is a tough problem.
It literally stinks.
Literally. Well said.
This question is from Linny. Linny asks, how often are city utilities inspected to update their condition to evaluate when they need to be replaced?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, it depends on what the utility is. So if it is, like, we are regularly scoping our sewer system and making sure that there aren't backups, especially in the spring and fall when potentially you can get clogs based on leaves or heavy rainfalls and things like that. We go out and we assess our catch basins often because that can result in flooding. Typically with water lines, we're able to know pretty quickly if there's a break or a leak of some sort, and then we'll respond. That's more reactive, I would say. With our streets, every year we're looking at the grade of streets and we're identifying which ones need what type of improvement. Same with sidewalks. We actually have a number of sidewalk contracts where we go out and we, as city engineers said, we go out and proactively identify where we need to make improvements. Right now we're in a big project related to lead pipes. So our intent is to replace every single lead pipe in the city, and we are actively working on that. We will probably be doing that for the next about 8 years. But the caveat with that is that we're doing that because it's the right thing to do. But the vast majority of children in our community who get poisoned by lead, it's not through water, lead in their water. We test all the water regularly. Most likely children are going to get poisoned from lead dust, from paint in old homes built before 1978. So I just want to make sure, even though we're replacing lead pipes, which is good, still be mindful that children get poisoned from lead paint.
This question is from Braden, specifically for you, so I'm glad I don't have to answer it. The state just raised its minimum wage to $10.33, which is laughable compared to what you need to live in GR, which is more than double that. What is the city doing to help close that gap for people living on minimum wage?
Yeah, that's a hard one too. I mean, under current state law, no city in the state of Michigan can pass a local living wage. I think for us, our goal, if you look at city services, we provide water, sewer, police, fire, economic development. So if community development. And so if I look at just what is under my purview of influence, right? I don't control things at the county level, which is related to public health and other things. And then at the state level, obviously, there's a whole host of things that they oversee, like minimum wage, that we don't. So I would say if you look locally at what we can do to try to help people, a lot of the work that we're doing in partnership around job training, in partnership with GRCC, I'm on the board of the Promise Zone. So how do we make sure that any high schooler, anyone who wants to go to community college to get an associate's degree or a certificate, then can do that at no cost. We have hundreds of students, I should say, right now going to community college at no cost because of the Promise Scholarship. So how do we create opportunities for individuals to be able to get a job that pays more, I think is really important. We're partnering at the city with GRCC to train people that can take city jobs that get that have a much higher hourly rate than that. And then you look at some of the work that we're doing around economic development and supporting small businesses, new businesses, scaling up businesses, attracting businesses who are committed to hiring folks right here in our community at a living wage is really important. So we've done a lot of that work through our partners at the Right Place. So we're looking at what we can do to have an impact, but ultimately I can't directly impact that, but we can do things that I think can help.
This next question is from Owen. Owen asks, it seems like every year I see more and more people on highway exits and at street corners asking for money. Even through the snow and ice we've had this past month. Does the city have services for these people to stay warm? I worry for their safety.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've worked really hard to make sure that we have adequate shelter space for individuals who are willing to use it. So a couple things. We have supported through city funding, but also with a lot of private funding in the city, supports for rapid rehousing. So we work with community rebuilders around that. Dégagé just opened up a new location for women who have been chronically homeless. We support a place called Crossroads. We have a homeless outreach team. We support Mel Trotter. So Mel Trotter Ministries, they did expand and they have ample space for a shelter. Their struggle over the last several months has been that they don't have enough staffing. So we've been working with a team to identify volunteers who can go in to make sure that no one gets turned away that wants to go into shelter. And then the other thing is we also work to make sure that we identify individuals who are chronically homeless. And so just because we've been doing a lot of this work on collecting data and trying to identify individuals who are homeless and try to get them rapidly rehoused, we know that not everyone who we see asking for money is homeless. Some of them may actually already have a place to live, a place that is typically a low-income housing or adult foster care. And people have a right, especially under free speech, to ask people for money, even at the street corners, I should say, or crosswalks, or I'm always worried about people's safety when they're walking out into traffic to ask for money. That's always a concern of mine. So I'm worried about their safety side too. But what I encourage folks to do is just let people know that there's resources. Typically they know. I mean, I get updates from our internal team often about where the needs are and where the gaps are at any given time. And we've done a pretty good job of letting people know where resources are, and that's what I would encourage others in our community to do as well. We have a lot of organizations locally that support individuals struggling with unstable housing or who are unsheltered. They just need to be willing to accept some of those supports.
This question is from Rhonda. Rhonda asks, you mentioned trying to bring businesses in that pay a living wage into GR. What kind of incentives does the city offer, and what does that look like? I'm guessing incentives for the businesses.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It kind of depends on the business. But typically what we'll do is we'll work with Michigan Economic Development Corporation to, and typically it's in a location that is underutilized. So a vacant building that's been vacant for a long time, or what we call obsolete, or an area of the city that really needs good paying jobs. And most often it's some type of tax capture. So what that means is that property isn't generating any property tax at the moment, but if a company comes in and builds or renovates on that location and they're bringing good paying jobs, we will support what's called a brownfield or a tax increment financing, where they can capture some of the taxes that they generate over the next 10 or 20 years and keep some of those. So as they build and invest in that property value will go up, and they can capture a portion, not all of it, but a portion of the taxes created by that investment and reinvest it in their business. And very often there are requirements to do that. So we have some requirements under, environmentally sustainable building, but then also if you commit to hiring or working with veterans, paying a certain wage, then you can have access to incentives. And MEDC is looking at that as well. But very often when a company comes to the Grand Rapids asking for an incentive, they give us a breakdown of wages and what that wage will be that they're paying. And we really encourage those higher paying jobs. And then some of them even create training programs, knowing that some of the individuals in that neighborhood may not have the skills to apply for and get those jobs. So they'll also incorporate mentorships or internships or job training programs.
To keep that employment local.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It looks like we are just about out of time today, so thank you to everyone who submitted questions. Of course, thank you, Mayor, for answering them and being here on the show with us today. Always really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
So thank you to everyone. You've been watching City Connection here on GRTV. Don't forget, you can always watch rebroadcasts throughout February on cable GRTV's Channel 25 or the GRTV YouTube page. See you next month.
The Grand Rapids Community Media Center is committed to creating a diverse and inclusive environment for all community members. It is a place where community voices are heard, valued, and lifted through media. We seek to provide area residents with a platform to participate in free speech, be engaged with the community, and share their diverse voices. As a multimedia platform organization, we provide and support a variety of community resources, including our radio station, WYCE 88.1 FM, our TV station, GRTV, our hyper-local news program, The Rapidian, web services, and our historic theater, Wealthy Theater.
WYCE is West Michigan's only community radio station that is listener-supported and volunteer-powered. WYCE uses local voices to help listeners discover and celebrate different services, cultures, and events. What I really like about programming music in WYCE is I get to not only interact with listeners and local musicians, but I get to put together a musical collage every week and give it away to the universe. As a volunteer programmer, you get the training on how to use equipment, how to access music from the library, and how to put together a great show that showcases local and national artists and still has your creativity included.
The Web Services Department helps West Michigan nonprofits connect, learn, create, and share through locally built and accessible websites. We help nonprofits strengthen their online presence by developing one-of-a-kind websites tailored to their specific needs. The Web Services team can take care of all the technical needs of getting a new site up and running, including website hosting, domain name registration, theme development, and page layout. Websites are built with accessibility and responsiveness in mind, making sure our projects are available on any screen and accessible to people of all abilities. We are passionate about helping organizations in the nonprofit sector effectively communicate their stories online, promoting equity and media access with our affordable services.
Wealthy Theater is a historic theater on the southeast side of Grand Rapids. It was built in 1911, and today it stands as a performing arts center, historic cinema, and community venue. We provide a space for community connection, where community members can get together, enjoy different shows and different events, from concerts to comedy, musicals, theater, film screenings, you name it. Anybody from the community can sign up to be a member and rent one of our spaces to host their event. We have a staff here at the theater that helps make all the events here happen, as well as a great community of volunteers. The goal is to bring the community together, bring audiences together, artists together, create experiences where those two can connect. Whether you're an audience member who wants to come see a show, or you're somebody who wants to put on a show, Wealthy Theater is a space for you.
The Rapidian is a hyper-local news source powered by, for, and of the people of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We launched in 2009 using funds from local organizations and generous donors, and this community-driven platform empowers residents to share their stories, post articles, and keep track of local events and issues. By emphasizing citizen journalism, the Rapidian provides a unique grassroots perspective and a vital news service for the residents of Grand Rapids. In 2023, we are relaunching the Rapidian with the Grand Rapids Documenters program, where we train and pay local citizens to cover public meetings, empowering residents with the tools and resources to strengthen the news media landscape in Grand Rapids and become more civically engaged.
GRTV airs public access television programming made by and for the Grand Rapids community, amplifying their voices to support a diverse and vibrant democracy. We provide the tools, training, and broadcast platform for free speech. Community members can take classes on video and production features, borrow professional equipment, editing software, and use of our studio facilities to create their own content. We help community members connect, learn, create, and share.